video's next. I'm just gonna walk with you.
Okay.
All right, we're going to get started in about a minute and a half, but you can still eat once we get started, because we're going to get started with that video that I promised you earlier, and it works now. You still got a minute and a half, so you don't have to stop talking.
Lifetime.
All right.
A couple more general infos. Good luck reading we had some Larry.
What do you do now?
Live.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. If you are out in the lobby, if you can hear my voice, we would love for you to join us. We're going to get started again, and I know we came back a few minutes early, but that's because we want to be able to let you guys go on time. So we want to honor your time, so we're going to get started. If you're still eating, please continue eating. Do not feel like you have to, stop. What we're going to do is, I really hope that you guys had an opportunity to go out and say hello to some of our vendors. Veronica, do I have a thank you? Do I have a, nope, yep, there we go. I just want to take just a quick second to thank our sponsors. I know I said I was going to do that several times, and then we had some technical issues, so I want to take a moment to do that now. Especially our table sponsors for tonight. We have Citizens Defending Freedom Faith. I really want to point out the ones that are, especially the ones that are here tonight. Well, and some of the others. I'm just going to go through them. We have the Herzog Foundation. We absolutely love them. America's Frontline Doctors, America's Future, We Impact the Nation, Florida Republican Assembly, the Informed Church, Liberty Council Action, Moms for America, Turning Point Faith, the Christian Family Coalition, Stand for Health and Freedom, love them. Salt and Light Council, they are amazing. The Liberty Sentinel, Alex Newman is here, he's with them. Defend Florida, Ethics and Public Policy Center, Claiming Justice for the Nations, and the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. I had their acronym there for the last few events, and this time I was like, they are not going to trip me up this time. I'm going to say it right. And then we also have our wonderful supporters, the Manatee and Sarasota GOPs, the MAGA Patriots, and the Truth and Faith and Action Alliance. If you don't know much about them, you should look them up. They're a great organization. All right, now I promised you guys a video before. And then we had, no, I'm not going to intro it. I promised you guys a video before, but then we had some technical issues. So I want you guys, as you're watching this, to remember all the things we've talked about so far. And then I will say a couple of words about it afterwards. But you go right ahead and watch this.
Imagine your child's classroom one day replaced by an AI tutor. Convenient, smart, but what are we losing? What are the risks we haven't yet seen? Artificial intelligence is already creeping into our schools, shaping how lessons are taught and how assignments are graded. But who sets the rules and who watches over it? 95% of parents say they worry about AI and its effects on their children. Yet, half of parents don't know what their school's policy is for using it. Some of the major concerns are over-reliance on technology, spread of misinformation, loss of the personal touch in teaching, data privacy, and bias. We are at a crossroads. Embrace the benefits of AI, yes, but we must protect our children's values, safety, and educational integrity. Here are 5 dangers every parent and grandparent should know. Number 1, overdependency. Students might lean on AI to answer for them rather than develop critical thinking. Number 2, misinformation and bias. Artificial intelligence can generate answers that are wrong or skewed with no human oversight. Number 3, loss of relationship and mentorship. A computer won't notice a student's emotional struggle or encourage them the way a teacher can. Number 4, privacy risks. AI systems often collect huge amounts of data about students, their performance, interests, and even their behavior. Number 5, hidden worldview control. If school districts enter into contracts with AI providers, the worldview built into those systems could reflect hidden biases or values that conflict with yours. We don't have to stand by quietly. That's why Florida Citizens Alliance is hosting a series of AI symposiums all throughout the state, designed for parents, grandparents, faith communities, and concerned citizens. At this event, we will lay out the facts you need to know, equip you to engage with schools and officials, and advocate for responsible policies, parental opt-in, data safeguards, and accountability for AI in education. Your voice matters. Your involvement matters. If you care about your child's education, their safety, and preserving values in their learning, please join us at our next symposium. Together, we can shape how AI is used in schools, not let it shape us. Visit goflca.org or scan the QR code to get your ticket and reserve your spot.
Hello again. I have a quick confession. The entire video that you just watched, every frame, every word, was generated using artificial intelligence. What you saw was not me, but a digital twin created through AI technology. Pretty wild, huh? But also a little eye-opening. If AI can make a video that realistic, imagine how it's shaping our kids' classrooms, their lessons, and even what they believe. That's why it's vital for parents, grandparents, and educators to understand just how AI is shaping our world and our children's learning. So join us at our next symposium and be a part of the conversation about the power that AI holds, the risks it can pose, and how we can protect what really matters. Hope to see you there.
So be honest, okay, because you're going to be quizzed later. Who actually thought that that was me? Yeah. Now, if I asked you to watch it again, now that you know that, you would notice things, little things, little things that just are inhuman. You know, nobody talks the way that I was talking. I mean, even someone that looks like me and has my voice and all those things. Like, there are still aspects of it that you could just chalk it up to like bad editing, or now that you know that, you can start to see those tiny little quirks. And I'm saying that to you because I want you to go back on our YouTube page after this, and I want you to watch it again. And I want you to pick those things out. The only way that we get better at telling what is real and what is fake is if we are exposed to it. If you're never exposed to these AI twins, you'll be like my husband, sitting there scrolling at night, watching these videos, and every 5 minutes I'm going, stop watching that, that's AI. And I'm just listening to it. No, but he doesn't know. For the average person, it's very hard to tell. And now with these deep fakes, you heard what Mary said earlier. She gave a software her likeness. She sat and had a conversation with it. I didn't even do that. I gave this software a video of me. I did not sit and converse with it. I didn't answer questions on the spot. I just gave it a video that I had previously recorded for one of my clients. And it was able to, with that video, create that. And it's pretty spot on. So the more you watch these things, the more you will become an expert yourself. We don't have AIs anymore that are producing 6 fingers and 3 eyeballs and all of these other crazy things. You really have to have an eye for it. And so that leads me to our next panel. You guys are gonna love this one. If you are on the second panel, you guys can come on up here and do me a favor and sit in the far left, or the furthest seats away from me. And because we've got a couple of moderators that are gonna come up, and rather than putting them in between you guys, we'll put them in the seats closest to us. Alex, you are such a great follower of instructions. I love Alex. He is one of my favorite people in the world. Okay, and I think we're getting one more chair, but I'll get that. No big deal. Okay, our next conversation is going to be moderated by 2 of my absolute favorite people, R.C. Williams and Juliana Ormond. This dynamic husband and wife team co-founded Watchman Action, a 501c3 organization that is committed to equipping the church to engage the culture, empower people to build advocacy plans to tackle the core issues that matter to them most. Watchman Action was grown out of the success of their research and behavioral marketing firm, Sherlock. That success then led to the launch of their 2 publications. The first, Ripped from the Headlines, which breaks down what the news means, and then their most recent one, which is We Are the Watchman Weekly, which connects the dots between current events and scripture. They also authored a book, which they have this book out of their table, and it's called Empowered to Act, Maintaining the Pillars of Patriotism. And if you'd like more information about them or their organization, you can find them at watchmanaction.org. So please join me in welcoming R.C. and Juliana to the stage as we prepare to explore the legislative and ethical framework surrounding AI, how policymakers, educators, and faith leaders can safeguard our children and uphold truth in this digital age.
Juliana, they clapped for me after the State of the State. I think that's a good sign, right? Guys, thank you for being here again tonight. This panel and the goal of it is, we want to talk policy. And we want to give folks some takeaways that are helpful. So we have great experts on the panel here who are going to introduce themselves momentarily. Our goal is to give you a framework. Whether you want to go to your local elected official, the state level, or even the federal level, we want you to be armed and ready with ways to help them understand just how important these issues are. So panel, what I'd like to do is for each of you to take 2 minutes, introduce yourself to the group, and we'll jump into our rapid fire questions. Christina, why don't you go first?
Good evening, I'm Christina Hoyser. I'm Senior Litigation Counsel with Liberty Counsel. It's a legal ministry based in Orlando. We focus on defending religious liberty, traditional family values, and life. I also serve on the legislative review team for Florida Citizens Alliance. I am the Republican State Committee woman for Collier County, and I am a proud mom of 2 daughters, one of whom just recently graduated from this fine institution.
Good evening, great Americans. Thank you very much. My name is Rich Tatum. I'm one of the school board members in Manatee County, Florida. I'm a retired Air Force officer. I'm also a little bit of an academic. I taught at the Air Force Academy for a while, pursuing a PhD in the great books of the Western world. So I figured between my experience in the bureaucracy of the government with the Air Force and then the academic side that I have, maybe the Manatee County School Board would be a good place for me to be. So I was fortunate enough to get elected, and I'm trying to guard that gate to keep the values that we all believe in safe. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Bruce Abramson. I'm part of the team here at New College. I'm in the administration. Right now I'm working to build up our applied data science graduate program. But the reason I'm on this panel, I guess, is that I'm an old school AI. I taught AI for the first time in 1987 after completing my doctoral dissertation. And what I've been looking at, and what's really kept me active since the mid-1980s, and the question of what does it mean to be living through the transition from the industrial to the information age? Because for everybody in the room, that's been a good thing. And I have been looking at issues for years in terms of what does it mean as we move from a history in which information was scarce and thus valuable to one in which it's overabundant and thus has no value at all. And how that changes society, how it reflects our values, how it manifests itself in the way that individuals form decisions, organizations apply strategies, governments craft policies. As I realized in the late 1980s, all of those things that in theory should benefit from ready access to more and higher quality information, but that's just a theory. So I set out 40 years ago to study whether or not that was happening and what it meant to society and individuals.
So I'm Alex Newman. I'm a homeschool dad of 6, and education is my passion. I've done 3 books on education so far because I think it's the most important issue of all of the issues. I'm fascinated by technology, but even more, I'm concerned about what is happening to our children. And I believe if we don't address these issues, we're going to lose our freedoms in our country and our churches and everything else. So I think this is actually one of the most important discussions that we could be having right now. AI obviously is one of the most important topics, and the education of our children is one of the most important topics. You put them together, and you realize this is what everybody should be talking about, what everybody should be thinking about. Unfortunately, very few people are. I write for a lot of different publications. I have my own company. I'm going to Brazil tomorrow to cover the UN climate summit. That's the kind of stuff I like to work on. But education ultimately is what it all comes down to for me. And in particular, I'm an advocate of Christian education. I think we've made some catastrophic mistakes when it comes to the education, the upbringing, and the discipleship of our children. And I think if we don't reverse those, we're going to destroy our civilization.
That's right.
Thank you, panelists. We do welcome your questions, guys. There should be paper floating around, and then someone will come by and pick it up. If you'd like a piece of paper to ask a question, just raise your hand. And we'll get you one. So let's jump in. Bruce, I'd like to come to you first. Like you said, you spent decades studying this, right? In plain language, can you help people understand the most important thing lawmakers and parents need to understand about how AI actually learns and why that matters for education?
Yeah, so one of the problems in any conversation of AI is that all the terms are undefined and everything is changing very quickly. Right, but basically, if you want to understand how any system learns, is you essentially start out with what's known as a prior belief. It's what you believe based on your life experiences, and you can start the system wherever you want. And then, as each new data item comes in, as each new piece of information item comes in, some things appear to become more likely, and other things appear to become less likely. The proper term, the term that I always like, is one that you've all run across in medicine. It's called the differential diagnosis, where you may go into a doctor and say, well, I sneezed 3 times. And then the doctor has a huge list of things that might be. And so we'll say, well, do you have a fever? Okay, if you have a fever, that makes some things a lot more likely and other things a lot less likely. You reorder the probabilities. There are a lot of different algorithms that go into AI systems, but by and large, this is what they do. They start out with a preconceived notion, which usually mirrors some baseline put in by their inventors, their programmers, and then it takes in information one piece at a time, which of course can be gained because you can determine which information it gets, and everything it sees, it says, okay, something in my possibility set just became more likely, and something else became less likely. And I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate that. This next question is going to go to Christina, but before I ask the question, I just want to tell the audience that RC and I had written a workbook over 100 pages, and we decided, because Brave Books and Deep USA came to us and said, can you make that for, teenager, college students? So we were like, hey, spend X amount of money to build it, let's put it into chat and see what chat does. Chat took out every reference to God, everything out of it. So my question to Christina is, parental rights are the heart of Liberty Council's work. If AI is used to monitor, assess, and influence students, what consent standards should Florida law require so parents, not bureaucrats, remain the decision makers?
Great question. Parental rights is paramount. And so I think it would be necessary that Florida law reflect that by having an opt-in requirement if schools are going to use an AI tool. And beyond that, I think it would be helpful for there to be some sort of portal that parents can access to monitor exactly what information is being disseminated to their child through AI. And certainly protecting any data regarding the child from being disseminated back to that AI feature.
So a follow-up question would be then is, what is protecting the children at this moment?
To my knowledge, right now it's really the Wild West and there are no guardrails in place. So it's important that in this upcoming session that the legislature deal with this. And I know that Florida Citizens Alliance has some items in bill writing right now, and we hope to get sponsors in the legislature to carry these bills forward.
Thank you, Christina. Richard, I'd like to come to you next. So you've led organizations where clarity of mission and accountability are non-negotiable. Thank you, sir. How can Florida school districts apply the same discipline to decide who owns AI decisions, teachers, superintendents, or even the board itself?
So I think the school boards are going to have some serious discussions and serious workshops, and it's going to take more than one workshop for us to sit down. I'd like to see the school boards have as much local control as possible to decide these things. The reason I say that is sometimes when these big laws come down from Tallahassee, they're well-intentioned, but they have like unintended consequences. So I'd like to, and they don't seem to really run those laws, at least the language ever, by maybe school board members and get feedback. So the law will come out, for instance, let's take the law that came out a couple years ago about making sure we don't have bad books in our schools and that we're not showing pornography and nudity to our students, right? Well, if you do that as a teacher, it's a third-degree felony. So then if you're teaching an AP history class, can you show the Statue of David? And we had teachers would come to me and they would say, well, I don't know, it's nudity. Am I going to go to jail? Am I going to be a felon if I show in my AP art class the Statue of David? Or if I'm teaching French Impressionist painting and I have to show Renoir and some of these, ladies laying on couches without any clothes on, am I going to jail? So as we go through, and I'm very much on board with all of the ideas from the FLC and what we're going to do, I would just encourage us to get a lot of feedback and take a lot of time to make sure that we don't over fine-tune these laws and we have unintended consequences with them. And one of the problems I see is that the legislative session is only 60 days long, and people want to get things done in that 60 days, and so I'm not sure we get the best product that we can. And then what happens is we have to go back and fix it a year or two later. The school starting time law, if you remember that came out a couple of years ago, that basically got repealed because that was not well done. There was the school safety law, which came down, which talked about some school safety measures we had to put in place. It was very expensive to do what they wanted. It was not workable, really, unless we wanted to make our schools prisons. That came down, so I'm very much on board with everything. Let's just really get a lot of feedback and a lot of discussions with people out in the field, look at the language and make sure, yep, that's workable, or no, that's really going to cause some unintended consequences.
Thank you, Colonel. If you could pass that down to Alex. Alex, I'm going to come to you in a second. If you have questions, please write them down, let us know. If you have a question ready, just raise your hand, and a member of the Florida Citizens Alliance team will come and grab it. So, my buddy Alex Newman, here comes a totally loaded question. I talked in the State of the State about John Dewey and his influence on education, basically the 100 stolen years. Alex, with all the investigative work you do, who are the people that are trying to railroad this system and indoctrinate our kids? Who are these people at a high level, and what do people need to understand about them?
That's a great question. I think it's directly relevant to what we're talking about, because AI is actually going to be the most powerful tool ever devised to accomplish those very objectives. And when you try to look at who is actually making the decisions that affect what's going on in the classroom, a lot of people just assume it's the school board, maybe it's the state legislature, the state board of education, or maybe even the U.S. Supreme Court or Congress. But there's really a lot more players involved. And I like to start with UNESCO. UNESCO kind of flies under the radar when it comes to the United States, but they're very bold and they're very open about what they're doing. Some of you are probably wondering what I'm talking about. UNESCO is the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and it has been run from the very beginning by anti-American extremists, actual card-carrying communists, people from mass murdering dictatorships. You've got jihadists there. Everybody's welcome, basically, except God-fearing, patriotic, American-type people. It's a true story, which is why Trump is getting us out again right now. But if you look at what the Director General said, Dr. Audrey Azoulay, who's, by the way, a member of the Socialist Party, they replaced a Communist Party member who was leading it before, so now they just have a CCP member as their deputy. When Trump announced that we were going to be leaving UNESCO, she said, "Oh, that's all right, we'll welcome you back as soon as you're ready to rejoin," because that's what's happened both the previous times we left. And in the meantime, we're going to keep working with our American partners, with publishing companies, state and local governments, academia, and everybody else. So basically, kick rocks, Mr. Trump, we're going to keep doing what we do. And UNESCO's influence extends into book publishing, it extends into union leadership. Just yesterday, I read an article that focused heavily on Education International. This is the global union of teachers unions. They purport to speak for all educators in the world. Obviously, we know that's not true, but the big teachers unions in the United States are a proud part of this. And if you go to their website right now, you will see them proudly bragging about how all over the world they are indoctrinating children to become little climate activists. They think that's a good thing. So a lot of it is kind of faceless bureaucrats in the bureaucracy, but there are actual people with names who are involved in this. If you go back to the very beginning, you have, of course, Robert Owen, who was talking to his spirit buddies, claiming to be fighting the great trinity of evil, marriage, family, private property, and Christianity. He's the first guy that seriously suggested the government ought to be educating our children. And you wonder why our society looks the way it does today. Horace Mann actually imported the system that Robert Owen dreamed up from Prussia back to the United States, to Massachusetts. Sam Mann wanted to get the Bible out of education, ended up being a total catastrophe, exactly the opposite of what he told us it would lead to. He said 90% of the crimes would be abolished if we could just have the government educating our children. We know how that turned out. Right? And then you have John Newman, who you mentioned, a guy who went to the Soviet Union and just couldn't say enough good things about this mass murdering system, especially the education system that they had. And so these are the types of characters that populate the system. Are there decent teachers in the classroom? Of course. Are there decent men and women on school boards? Of course. We have one right here. But the people that are really making the decisions about what your children are going to be learning, and increasingly what AI is going to be doing to the hearts, minds, and souls of your children, do not share our values. And I could give an endless list of specific examples, but I think that kind of gives you a 50,000-foot view.
Alex, thank you. Bruce, I'd like to come back to you here. So you gave us great context around how AI learns. It kind of dovetailed on that. If Florida were to draft an ethics and AI education statute, your take on the one principle that would absolutely have to be met.
Right. So I have to say that at this point, I am not a fan of that type of legislation or regulation. I think that this happens a lot in technology. It happens a lot in a lot of fields. People wake up one day and say, "Oh my God, we're in a crisis. We've got these terrible problems we have to deal with. We don't understand the environment in which we're working. Could government please come in and fix it for us?" That is always a prescription for disaster. We saw it most clearly with COVID. This is the strategy behind climate change. And for 20 years, from Bill Clinton through Barack Obama, this was the issue around healthcare. So I am not in favor of that type of legislation. If you want to know what the state legislatures could do to make things helpful, the best thing that can happen right now is to push for various forms of disclosure. Let us know what data you've used, what sources you've used to train your model. You probably can't get the algorithm out there because the algorithms are designed to change organically. It's very difficult technically, but the algorithms are not stable by design. they self-direct and they self-learn. But I want to know how you're training, what your training data is, if there are general rules you're using, if there are guidelines you're using, what your sources are, where your funding is coming from. The reason I want all of this is that we are in the midst of an arms race. Okay? And what we need to do is not so much worry about what's happening in offense, because people will use weapons against us whether we like them or not. We need to develop defense. And the way to develop a defense is if you push people to disclose where they're coming from, what they're working from, and what's shaping, then you can develop a cottage industry on the side that is going in and analyzing that training data and coming out and saying, here are the biases that are coming out, and here's why they're coming out, and here's where they're coming from. You can start developing filters so that I can add it on top of the system and I can put it in place and protect myself that way. I think that if you actually want to legislate or you want to regulate, those are much more productive. They are much better than coming up with rules that might even make sense today, but get thrown into the investment of technology, develop expectations, get stuck in place. One of the analogies on a piece of RC that I like to use was that in the mid-1990s, there was some very good legislation going on in terms of the internet. I've often said the best legislative years I've seen in the years I've been following American politics were 94 to 98. And that was because in those years, Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton both had to sign on to anything. And those were two very smart guys, passionate about the future. And during those 4 years, we passed a lot of very interesting landmark legislation that was designed to let the internet develop without destroying too many expectation interests. The problem is they're mid-90s legislation, and they were developed for a nascent internet. So suppose I said to you, I don't get it. When my kids were in kindergarten in the mid-90s, I made up a bunch of rules that worked really well. And now that they're in their 30s with families and jobs of their own, those rules aren't working anymore. What's the problem? That's the question we're asking about internet regulation today. So let's not repeat that with AI. Let's just let's push people to put what they're working from out in public view so that we can develop defense industries around it.
Bruce, thank you. Christina, I'd like to come to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to have to respectfully disagree just a little bit. While I do agree generally with the principle that typically when government gets involved, they just make things worse, not better, I think there are some exceptions to that, and I think government should regulate itself. And we're talking about public education, and I think it's critical that there are guardrails in place. The number one role of government is to protect our rights, and we just talked about parental rights a moment ago, and parents should be the ones who are teaching their children, instilling values in their children, raising their children, not government schools. So I think it is important that the legislature act and put guardrails in place and make sure that if, to the extent that AI is being used, that it's a closed universe, that they're just teaching potentially core subjects. We know where the information is being drawn from, and there's no social emotional learning, as they call it, or anything else that's attempting to instill values in children over and above what the parents are doing, or contrary to what parents are teaching their children.
Christina, thank you. So Richard, I'd like to come to you next. We welcome your questions if you have them. You know, you're on the front lines of things, right? Serving on the school board. And I mentioned the Kylie's earlier this evening. And one of the things that we learned from them is that they put together a playbook to help their local public servants to understand the issue and then to help them act. So how can constituents help you in this fight to be better equipped to represent their interests?
It's always good to use this before you use this, right?
Amen.
You know, I think the best way that the constituents can help is by supporting organizations that share our values, by supporting all the organizations out here, our partners, and getting them more involved. I was talking to Daryl just a little while ago about how there's so many organizations out there that are fighting for our values, but they're disparate. They're not organized, and they're not well funded. And I'm somewhere in between you and you on the legislation thing, right? I'm not a big fan of big, long pieces of legislation because what I've seen on the front lines is they have unintended consequences. But I'm not opposed to, like, for instance, the legislation that did away with DEI programs. Gone, that should be gone, right? So I think what they could do is supporting organizations that are out on the front line fighting the battles for us and working with organizations. For instance, I tried to get our civics and history curriculum to be the Hillsdale history curriculum and the Hillsdale civics curriculum. We buy those every 5 years. And so we had to change a local policy in our school system to be able to use those curriculum because they're not on the Florida approved curriculum school list. And unfortunately, I got voted down 2-3, and so we have some not really good curriculum for history and civics. But, you know, supporting Hillsdale and helping them get that curriculum approved and coming to school board meetings and when they see like items like that on the agenda and letting their representatives know that we want the values from these organizations that are out there. You know, helping organizations, for instance, maybe set up TPUSA chapters in our high schools. I, as a school board member, that's a very political type of thing. I support TPUSA. I don't think it's probably my purview to go out and say, at a school board meeting, say, hey, let's set up TPUSA school board meetings, because I try and keep politics off the dais. But other people within the community that would want to do that, I would certainly be supportive of that and would encourage us to do that. So I would encourage citizens to get on board with FLCA when these alerts go out. Definitely write your legislators and let them know that you're on board with what FLCA is doing, but also support our organizations. You know, Voltaire wrote his little play called Candide. If you know the story of Candide, right? Young guy, kind of naive, thinks the world's a great, beautiful place, goes all the way around the world, has a bunch of misadventures. He comes back home, and at the end of the story, his lesson is, I think we should just cultivate our own garden. Right? That's cultivate my own garden. So here in the community, you know, supporting TPUSA chapters and other organizations right here in our community locally that share our values. That's probably the best way that citizens can support what we're doing. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Christina, I want to throw a quick question to you. Liberty Council, what is their number one concern? What are they doing when it comes to AI and education?
Well, frankly, we haven't delved into this space. We do have a political arm, Liberty Council Action, so I'm sure that they are working with legislatures to make sure that there are guardrails in place like we spoke about earlier. As far as Liberty Council, we're client-driven. So since we're sort of at the forefront of this, I'm sure soon enough there will be parents, educators, other stakeholders who come to us if they see any intersection between AI and religious liberty, because we're primarily focused on defending religious liberty.
Awesome, thank you. If you can pass that down to Alex. Alex, we got a question from the audience, and it was, can you share a snapshot of homeschooling in Florida and our nation? And is it growing? And how is it being impacted by artificial intelligence, if at all?
Great question. Homeschooling is very hard to speak about in broad terms because it's so unique with every family. Every single family that homeschools does it differently. I can speak about my experience, I can speak about the experience of the families that we know and we homeschool with. We're involved in 2 different co-ops, or we're part of classical conversations. So on a general level, homeschoolers are largely here in Florida Christian. They're largely concerned about what's happening in the public schools, and they are trying, at least the ones that we know, not to replicate what's going on in the government schools at home. I think among the public there's this misconception that homeschoolers just do what the kids in the government schools do, but at home with mom and dad, and that's not true. Homeschooling looks different every day. Some days, yes, you might be sitting at the dining room table, opening up a textbook with mom, doing something on the board, memorizing your multiplication tables. But another day, you might be going out to a museum, or going to play soccer, or going down to the beach, or going to a park to study gopher tortoises, or whatever it is. Every day looks very different. It is growing very rapidly, and that was true before they passed this so-called school choice bill. And the school choice bill, I will say, is changing it in some pretty dramatic ways. And of course, we've had a front row seat to this. Typically, homeschoolers were very independent-minded, not interested in having free things. but also not interested in being controlled or told what to do. One of the things that happens as soon as you take the money in Florida is you're technically no longer a homeschooler. You're a student who has what's called a personal education plan or a personalized education plan. And you surrender some of your key freedoms. You have to start submitting to government testing on a regular basis so that the government can see what you're learning, if you're learning, et cetera. And this huge influx of money has transformed it in some ways that I personally find distasteful. Whereas before this huge flow of money came in, churches were open right and left for homeschool co-ops, for helping in whatever way. Now everybody wants to get paid. In fact, both of the churches where we're doing our homeschool co-ops are now demanding money, whereas in the previous years that we did, it never occurred to anybody that we should be paying for that. The prices for everything is skyrocketing. It's skyrocketing. It's getting much more standardized. Everybody comes to these conventions now with all this government money and wants to buy government-approved resources that are on the list of government-approved resources. So it's changing rapidly. It's growing very rapidly. I'm afraid that Betsy DeVos may end up getting her wish. She called for a few years prior, back when she was Secretary of Education, to give a speech to the Young Americans for Freedom, the YAF Foundation. And she said that we need to redefine all education to be public education. And unfortunately, that's the direction that it's going in. In Florida, it's happening relatively rapidly. It's not happening all over the country yet, but I'm afraid that's the direction it's moving in, and so I'm very concerned about that. I hope we can push back on those trends. But overall, the picture in homeschooling is very bright. If you compare your average homeschooler in the state of Florida to your average child in a government school, it's like the difference between night and day. So we need to preserve that.
Thank you, Alex. Christina, I'd like to come back to you. Your opinion. How should Florida guard against AI systems that might pressure or penalize students for expressing faith-based beliefs or traditional values?
That's interesting. I would say, well, we know the Supreme Court has articulated that neither students nor educators forfeit their First Amendment rights at the schoolhouse gate. So that will continue to be the law. Students with certain reasonable limitations have the right to pray in school, to read the Bible, to express their religious beliefs. If it were discovered, first of all, as I said before, AI should not be wading into other areas beyond just core subjects. If AI can provide something of value, about physics or calculus, then that might aid educators. But beyond that, they certainly should not be instructing children in matters of religion. So I think that's what the legislature is going to have to work on. If, to the extent that AI is going to be used in a public school setting, it needs to be clearly defined for what purposes it is allowed and what purposes it is not allowed. And then in addition to that, there need to be clear consequences and repercussions built into the law so that the law is enforceable, that there are penalties to school districts, to educators, and that parents could bring a lawsuit potentially, that there's a right of action that's built into the law so that they can vindicate their rights and the rights of their students if it comes to that.
Thank you, Christina. Bruce, I'd actually like to come back to you for a second. So you gave a great layout around where you feel the role of legislation should be. We welcome your questions, by the way. Please continue to send them. You're on the front lines of this, dealing with students and educating every day. I mentioned during the State of the State that the moral compass and biblical worldview is almost non-existent. In dealing with young people who want to make a career out of this or want to build things, what feedback are you getting from them on where things are right now as they look at this as a choice?
So I don't...
Bruce, I'm sorry, if you could just make sure to put the mic as close to your mouth as possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure if there's so much look at it as a choice. I think that what you've hit on is that we no longer have a shared culture, and this is an experiment. There has never before been a culture in the world that thought that it could move forward without a shared collective morality, without a shared memory, without shared stories. What I see is students coming to college today, they don't know the Bible stories, they don't know the Gospels. They don't know the classics, they barely know the fairy tales. We have no common culture. They're showing up with such little in the way of general background knowledge that it's scary, because there is really, I mean, I tried, you know, in a small class at a seminar I was teaching, but I tried putting forward examples. I draw them from the classics, they don't know them. I draw them from Bible stories, they don't know them. I think the only thing I got out that everybody resonated with right away was a point of moral philosophy, where I had to say, so you remember the part where S.H.I.E.L.D. suddenly discovers that it's been infiltrated by Hydra, which was a move from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where S.H.I.E.L.D. was the good guy agency that discovered basically that Operation Paperclip had filled it with Nazis since the 40s. Okay, and it wakes up one day and discovers that it's that's what they know. We need to get back to a shared morality. We need to get back to basic Bible stories. And we need to get beyond. There's a huge problem in trying to teach any of this stuff, beyond the legal problems. As soon as you throw a Bible story into play, you get two complaints. You got a complaint from one side that says you're opposing religion, and you got a complaint from the other side that says you're presenting it in a way that's blasphemous. You know, Jesus Christ Superstar and Life of Brian were both picketed when first released by Christians and by Jews. Okay? This is a problem. This is the classic Baptists and bootleggers coalition that gave us prohibition. We need to get to the point. I mean, yes, setting aside illegalities, which are huge problems, we need to find ways to present this material that is entertaining, that just gets the story across, that is not preachy, that we have defenses to. Well, we're introducing religion into the public sphere, we're not, but we're not opposing it. And that gets across, yeah, okay, you may think this is blasphemous, but you know what? People will know the stories. They don't know the stories now. Blasphemy is the least of a problem. Yeah. They have no idea. So I don't think of that really, I mean, I don't know exactly what the it that I was supposed to be answering is interfering with. But there is a huge problem right now. There are no values. There are no shared values. There's no shared culture. And that is absolutely destroying education at all levels. Because I couldn't draw examples or references from anything that landed with the students.
It's depressing.
Yeah, Richard, go ahead, please.
So as a school board member, I want to remind people of a couple things. Number one is the Florida Constitution says that there will be a efficient, uniform, safe, free public school system in the state of Florida. So it has to be there, right? I mean, to some degree, I agree with Alex that if we could do it all privately, that maybe would be a better way of going, but it has to be there. So the second thing is that a lot of the curriculums that we have are driven by the standards, right? The standards, and they're done by people up at FLDOE in conjunction with the people that write the textbooks, and then there's the State Board of Education that approves them. So if we're going to go back, and what got me thinking about this was your comment versus we've kind of lost this common culture, right? But if we're going to teach our children this common culture and actually have this framework, some of you have seen me speak before. I came up with this thing called the ABCs of being just American, right? A and B, America's beautiful. C, we have a capitalist free market economy. D, we have a democratic constitutional representative republic. E, we have a common language, which is English. F, the right to bear firearms. G, H, and I figured it out. Greco-Roman intellectual heritage. And then J, Judeo-Christian values. Until we can get the standards of education that are used by the textbook makers to write our texts and our curriculums, it's going to be very hard to come up with this common culture that we have. So that would really be something that maybe the FLCA could focus on, is getting those standards organized. We did have the Philadelphia Declaration that just came out recently, which kind of is aligned with that to some degree, but because there has to be a public education system according to the Constitution of Florida, we need to try and align it with the traditional common culture values that we have to the maximum extent possible to do that. And that's something that like the FLCA and other groups that are in that domain of policy could certainly work on. Thanks for letting me make that comment.
Thank you.
So I have a couple of friends that are in the anti-human trafficking world, and they are terrified because the legislators are pushing back on using the word grooming in the paperwork. And it's like, well, I mean, why are they not using the word grooming? And we're watching them using artificial intelligence to groom our children. So if any of you want to answer the question of what do? We keep talking about, our morals and our values and pushing on the culture, because once upon a time, the church was responsible for the culture. We were the center of the culture, and now we haven't done that. We've abdicated our role. We were talking to Catherine Austin Fist, and she said, the control system. Scott Kiley was talking about, digital currency. Well, you know what? When they come for our children and say, you better castrate your child or you're not getting your money, what are we going to do, the church? So my question to the panelists is, what do we do as a church to say, you know what, this is the red line, this is what we expect to be happening, and how do we make sure that we're in control of it?
Who's the first brave soul that wants to take?
I think the church needs to be on the front line of all these discussions. The church's job, among others, is to equip the saints for every good work. How are we going to do that if church leadership and Christians in general are not involved in these most important discussions? Really, how are we going to raise up the next generation? And so when it comes to the nexus with AI, I think the church has a vested interest in this. My friend Dana Smithwick at the Nehemiah Institute has been doing worldview studies for a very long time. He's surveyed, I think, at least hundreds of thousands of people across the country on their worldview and how it lines up with the Bible. And what he has found, what his data shows, is something like 80% of children from Christian homes who spend 12 years in a government school are going to leave the faith and they're going to leave the church. That's crazy. How come we're allowing this to happen? And even worse, how come the church is not doing anything about it? Even from a self-interested perspective, if you're just a greedy pastor and you want to make sure tithes keep coming in so you can have a retirement, you're going to lose your whole congregation. So the church has to be doing things here. We bought into this ridiculous lie that the church shouldn't be involved in anything that the government declares to be politics. First of all, that's heretical and ridiculous. If you look at Jesus' own life, he's our example. He was pretty clear when he was dealing with the politicians of his day. But by the way, that was not Rome, that was the Sanhedrin, that was the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And he called them a brood of vipers and whitewashed tombs. He said, who's going to save you from hell? Right? We need to be more Christ-like, right? Especially when they're castrating our children, when they're castrating our sons and putting our girls on testosterone. So the church, I think, needs to take a very clear moral stand and say, this is utterly unacceptable. We will not allow one more child to be subjected to this absurdity.
The
Bible actually, it doesn't say exactly what your education needs to look like, but it sure gives you the basics. If you go to Proverbs 1:7, Proverbs 9:10, the Bible says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Everybody in this room knows that the government schools are not teaching one iota of the fear of the Lord. And therefore, if we believe the Bible, which Christians say they do, there is no wisdom and there is no knowledge being imparted to these children. That should be completely unacceptable to anybody who calls himself or herself a Christian. And now we have, from the highest levels, I mentioned UNESCO earlier. 2019, the UN brought together governments from around the world in Beijing. And I encourage people to read this document. It's called the Beijing Consensus Document on AI in Education. And it openly calls for the use of AI to change the attitudes, values, and beliefs of children. So did the 2015 Qingdong Declaration that they signed in another Chinese city. These are UN documents agreed to by every government in the world. When the UN itself tells you we're going to use AI to change the values of your children, and trust me, they're not talking about making your children full of Christian values. The idea of the churches not standing up and saying, or the politicians or the parents not standing up and saying something, to me is an absolute outrage.
Thank you, Alex.
Alex, thank you for that. Christina, I'd like to come back down here. So as we circle the airport to land the plane, for each of you, 60 seconds. What do you want the audience to take away from this discussion tonight that they can put to use tomorrow? Christina, we'll start with you.
Thanks. And actually, I'd like to piggyback off of something Alex just said regarding the church wading into quote-unquote politics. The church does need to be influencing elections, and the chief influencer of who its congregants are voting for. And, speaking of the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom, we need to make sure that our elected officials fear the Lord first. And then we know that they'll be making the right decisions because they have a fear of the consequences if they don't. So I want our elected officials to have a fidelity to Jesus and a fidelity to the Constitution second to that. I think the takeaway is if you're a parent, you need to be paying attention to what your children are doing, and you are in control of what your children are doing, and you need to take those reins and not be told by the culture or by your children, who can be very persuasive and manipulative, that, you know, all the kids are doing it, it's fine, there's nothing wrong with it, you're worried about nothing. You need to make sure you have your eyes on things at all times. And going along with that, get your kids out of government schools, I think, is my number one piece of advice, because they are there to indoctrinate your children and alienate your children from you and from your values and from God. And that's just the harsh reality of it.
Christina, thank you. Richard, 60 seconds. What do you want people to take away from tonight that they can use tomorrow?
So two things that we've already talked about, and I hit on it before, is, you know, these organizations are fighting on the front line, and sometimes the best thing that we can do is support them with donations, because all of these are nonprofits, right? And so what they do requires funds and requires money. So, you know, look nationally to places like the Heritage Foundation, Hillsdale, these organizations, TPA USA, but also look locally, see what you can do locally in your community and support those organizations. Cultivate our own gardens, as Candide said, right here in our own community. And the second thing is with the church, we were at a church, this was in, I think, the spring of 21, and the whole Leah Thomas thing, if you remember that guy who was swimming with girls, it was right in the middle of COVID, and we were at this church, and there's a pastor, and he's got his mask on, you know, and so he takes it off, and he walks up on stage, and he says something like, well, you know, I guess I really ought to address this transgender thing, and I thought, man, that's the number one, take your doggone mask off. And number two, like, it's like, well, I guess I need to wade into this because, you know, I'm a pastor, I suppose I should talk about, you know, this thing. And you don't want to go to churches like that, right? Go to churches where the pastor is willing to stand up there and not say about Republican or Democrat, but look, you need to vote for the guy or gal who doesn't want to chop off children's genitals, right? And you need to vote for the guy or the gal who doesn't believe that men should be swimming with women and women should be swimming with men, and that men should be undressing in front of women and women should be undressing in front of men. Find those churches, and when the pastor stands up and gives that sermon, go up and slap him or her on the back and say, good job, keep it up, right?
Thank you, Richard. Bruce, same question for you, my friend. 60 seconds, please.
All right, so a couple of quick takeaways. First one is, the technology is incoming. It's there, you can't do anything about it. Once a weapon system has been developed, it will be deployed, it will be deployed against you. There's no substitute for doing the work. And the focus that we want from people is enabling the competent defense. You gotta learn self-defense. If you live in a bad neighborhood, it's one thing to say, I wish the mayor and the police chief would clean up town. It's another to learn how to walk home through those dangerous streets. You gotta learn how to do that, you gotta do it by yourself. The second thing is, we're in the middle of a values conflict. Andrew Breitbart famously said, politics is downstream from culture, well, culture is downstream from values. What's tearing this country apart is a values conflict. We do not share values, we do not use words the same way. Okay? And this is a huge problem, we have to get beyond it. And I do agree with Andrew, and by the way, I am, of all the people in the room, I'm probably the worst spokesman for the church because I'm Jewish. So, you know, I try not to tell churches what to do, but I will say that in all faiths and in all denominations, there are individual churches or synagogues, there are pastors, there are rabbis, there are priests who are leaders, and there are those who are followers. We need the leaders. We need those to stand up and say, this is what we stand for, and if you don't stand with us, we stand against it. We need it from our organizations. What we've seen over the past couple of weeks coming out of the Heritage Foundation is shameful. Stand for something. You can't, a big tent doesn't mean anybody can wander in. You have to say, here are our principles, here are our values, and if you vote our way, and you used to be on our side, and you've done good work, we'll welcome you back when you shape up. Get out right now. Because we haven't seen it from our own side. It's cheap and easy to take on the other guys' lunatics. So those are the two takeaways.
Thank you, Bruce. Last but not least, Alex Newman, your thoughts.